The AWS .NET Mock Lambda test tool is used to test and debug your AWS functions locally on your development machine. Based on the IDE you use for development, you can attach it to the Lambda tool and test and debug through your function code. When using Visual Studio, the Mock Lambda test tool is all set up and ready to go with the default Lambda templates provided in the AWS toolkit. However, this is not the case when you're using JetBrains Rider. So in this video, let's exactly see how you can set up JetBrains Rider to work with the Mock Lambda test tool. We will also quickly see what the experience is in Visual Studio. Hello everyone, my name is Rahul and welcome back to this YouTube channel. If you're new here, I make videos on .NET, Cloud and DevOps. This video is sponsored by AWS and is part of my .NET on AWS series. Without much delay, let's get straight into configuring Rider to work with the Mock Lambda test tool. The AWS .NET Mock Lambda test tool is a tool that you can download from GitHub. I'll put the necessary links in the description of this video. Now, one thing to quickly note is that this tool is not a local Lambda environment. It's just optimized for quick local debugging with minimum dependencies that is necessary for this experience. This is also installed usually along with the AWS toolkit, which I walked through in a separate video, which will be linked here and in the descriptions below. So let's quickly switch over to JetBrains Rider, where we can create a new solution. So let's click New Solution and let's choose a AWS Lambda Function template. So we can search for Lambda and select the Lambda empty function. Now these templates are available in Rider for me because I've installed the AWS toolkit. So let's give this a name. So let's call this rider.lambda and let's make sure this is placed in the appropriate folder. So let's click Create, which creates a new AWS Lambda function with the empty template. Here, you can see we have the solution with the one project that's created inside. It has the function.cs, which is the Lambda function handler, and it also has the AWS Lambda tools default.json. Now, this is the configuration that is required for the Mock Lambda test tool to run. You can see some of the default configurations inside here. Now, if we navigate back to the tool documentation, you can go to the Configure for JetBrains Rider section to get more details on how to configure this tool to work along with Rider. So let's follow along with these steps and make sure that this is set up for Rider. So first we'll need to select and run Edit Configurations, and let's add a new executable configuration. So let's switch back to Rider. Let's click Add a Configuration and click Edit the Configuration. Inside here, we can select a new .NET executable as the configuration. Let's give this as a name. So let's say Mock Lambda test tool. Now we need to specify the exe path and also the working directory for this tool to work. So let's switch back. And here we can see set the exe path to the field of the AWS Lambda test tool blazor tester.dll. Now you can find the Mock Lambda test tool inside your users folder and under the .NET tools, since that is installed as a .NET tool. Now if we navigate back to the documentation, you can scroll up and find information on how to install and run the .NET tool. Now this is the command to install the AWS Lambda test tool as a global .NET tool. So once you run this, you should have this under the Tools section in your .NET folder. So to select the executable path, let's click the Browse button. Now since I have already selected this earlier, it's defaulting to that directory. So if I navigate back all to the root of this, you can see this is under my Users folder, under the .NET folder in my user, and under Tools section. Here you can see the actual exe for the Lambda test tool. But if we navigate further into the .store, you can see the AWS Lambda test tool 6.0. So let's navigate further into that, into the directories to the tools, .NET 6.0, any, and here you can see the AWS Lambda test tool blazor tester.dll. So let's select that. With the exe path selected, let's set up the working directory. Now this should be the .NET Core Lambda project root. So let's navigate back to Rider and select the working directory, and let's switch to the working directory of this project. So that's under resources for me, YouTube code, and we can find the project that we just created, which is rider.lambda. Now this specific Lambda function project is living inside that folder under source and rider.lambda. So let's select that folder. and let's click apply and click OK. Now once that is set up, you can see there is a new configuration here with the name that we specified, which is mock lambda test tool. So let's put a breakpoint in our function.cs and let's hit debug. Now what this is going to do is going to launch this external tool using .NET and attach it with this debugger. Now you can see that there is the AWS .NET Core 6 mock lambda test tool, and we get the set of information in here. Now it automatically loads the AWS Lambda tools-defaults.json, which have the configuration information for this Lambda function. This is the exactly same JSON file that we just saw a moment back. So now if we navigate back and let's put in an input, so let's say test and click execute function. Now this hits the breakpoint in Rider and we can step through and debug this code. Now we have successfully set up mock lambda test tool as a .NET configuration. So let's stop this. Let's edit this configuration, and you can also choose to save this as part of your project file so that this can be checked into your source code and other people can also use this specific configuration. So let's click done and let's click apply. Now this is going to create a new folder in the root of this solution. So let's right click here and let's say open in and let's say explorer. Now here you can see the .run folder, which has the mock lambda test tool .run file. This is the configuration that we just created. So let's open this in Visual Studio Code, and this has the information around the executable path and the working directory as we have set up. Now, even though I selected explicit paths in my directory, it has automatically changed it to use common variables in the path names. So based on the user's home directory, it then finds the .NET tools and the appropriate folder in which that DLL will be found. Now, as you install a different version of the test tool, you will have to fix this configuration file. Now you can see that the working directory is also set with a relative path. Now this is using the $project_dir, which is the root of this particular solution. So even if you were to copy this onto a different machine, this would still apply as long as the .NET tools is installed in the default location. So this file can be checked in, and now you get the .NET mock lambda test tool configuration in here as well. Now let's quickly see how Visual Studio does this and see a different approach on setting up this configuration in Rider. So let's navigate to Visual Studio. Let's click create a new project and let's select the AWS Lambda project and click nest again. Now here, let's call this as rider.lambda.vs. Now we can place this under the same folder. So let's put it in the YouTube code and let's create this particular project. Now this is going to pop up the blueprint. So let's select empty function and let's select finish. Now this is going to create an empty Lambda function just like Rider did for us. However, there is a few differences with Visual Studio. You can already see that the mock Lambda test tool is defaultly set up inside Visual Studio. So if I expand the Solution Explorer, you can see there is the function.cs just like before. And we also have the AWS Lambda tools-defaults.json file. In addition to that, if you expand the properties, you can see there is also a launch settings file, which has the settings for this configuration. Here, this is automatically wired up to use the mock lambda test tool, and it's using the .NET Lambda test tool executable directly. You can see that Visual Studio is automatically setting up a profile with the mock lambda test tool and directly configuring it to work with the mock lambda test tool. So all we need to do in this case is press F5 and it automatically starts the mock lambda test tool and sets up the debugger and works seamlessly. So now the Lambda test tool is launched. So let's select again test and let's click execute function. And you can see this debugger is easily hit in Visual Studio. So let's stop this and let's navigate back to launch settings and copy this over to our Rider solution as well. So let's switch back to Rider and add the LaunchSettings.json file in this project as well. So let's right click on this. Let's say add configuration files and let's select LaunchSettings.json. Now this is going to create a new file under the properties folder. So let's copy and paste this profiles into this file as well. So now we have the exact same configuration inside here. Now if I expand the configuration, you can see the mock lambda test tool which we created through the .run file, and we can also see the rider.lambda mock lambda test tool. This is coming from the launch settings. So let's select that and let's click debug. However, this prompts up an error which says this is an invalid working directory for this particular configuration. Now this is because in Rider, we cannot use the executable directly as in the executable path. We will have to configure this as a .NET tool. Now to do that, let's switch this executable path as .NET, which means this will be running a .NET tool. So let's specify .NET as the command. And let's pass in the parameters to the mock Lambda test tool in the command line arguments. So we can switch back to the Visual Studio Code. Let's copy over this executable path. So let's copy this full path and let's paste this inside the command line args. Now to start this in the port, let's also put a space and specify the port. Now in this particular mode, you cannot use the $$ parameter. So instead of this, you can use the %user profile parameter. So this is a Windows level variable which you can use. Instead of the working directory, this needs to be the project directory. So let's remove this and let's specify the project directory. So let's use $bracket and let's specify project dir. Now once that is set up, you can see this is going to run the executable .NET and it's going to run this DLL and launch it on port 5050. So let's give this a name and let's put a bracket and let's specify Rider. Now once that is all set up, let's make sure to build and you can expand this and you can select the Rider mock Lambda test tool and let's click debug. Now it automatically launches the debug tool again. And we can test this once more. So let's specify test and click execute function and this debugs as expected. Now in this case, we were easily able to use the LaunchSettings.json file. Now if I was to open this exactly same project in Visual Studio, so let's navigate back, let's specify file, open a project or solution. Let's navigate to YouTube code and let's select rider.lambda and let's select this solution file. Now inside Visual Studio, this automatically picks up this configuration from the properties and LaunchSettings.json. Let's click this and this is going to launch the tool as expected and run as well. So let's specify test. Let's put a breakpoint inside the code. So let's go to functions.js. Let's put a breakpoint here. And let's click execute function. Now this is also going to debug and you can step through and test your code locally. So if you were to use the LaunchSettings.json file, this is going to work with Visual Studio as well. So if your team consists of people working across Rider and Visual Studio, you can use this approach and set it up in the launch settings file as well. Now in these cases, you can also leave another configuration, which was the original one. So let's put a comma here and let's paste it from my clipboard. So let's specify the profiles mock Lambda test tool and let's remove this additional nesting here. And also remove the additional braces. So you can leave two different profiles inside this and name this accordingly for your IDE. So let's specify Visual Studio in this case. And in this particular case, I can choose the Visual Studio config if I'm running in Visual Studio and choose the Rider one if I'm using Rider. So let's select Visual Studio and let's click Mock Lambda Test Tool. And in this case, it uses the .NET tool path directly and it's not tied to the version of this particular package. I hope this helps you to set up and get working with the .NET Mock Lambda Test Tool with Rider and also Visual Studio. If you like this video, kindly hit the like button. If you want to be notified of future such videos, please hit the subscribe button as well. It also helps me to grow this YouTube channel. Thank you and see you soon in the next video.